Bom dia. Sejam bem-vindos. O Sapiense, o Departamento de Formação e Psicanálise de vocês. Esperamos que tenhamos uma manhã e tarde bem agradável e que seja bastante profícuo esse trabalho. Nós, do departamento, temos tido interesse há alguns anos em estudar Bill e Meltzer, e para coroar esse estudo, esse interesse, nada melhor do que essas duas conferencistas que escolhemos para dar continuidade e instigar ainda o interesse de mais gente no aprofundamento desses estudos. Quero passar a palavra para a nossa coordenadora de eventos, professora Maria Tereza Rocco, que vai fazer a apresentação da mesa.
Bom dia, sejam bem-vindos. Então, nós vamos ter a programação de hoje, uma conferência da Meg Harris Williams agora na parte da manhã, das 10 ao meio-dia. Teremos um intervalo para o almoço, do meio-dia às 2. Depois uma conferência da Yancy, das 14 às 15h45, um intervalo e uma nova palestra da Meg Harris, das 16 às 17, e um seminário clínico com a Yancy, das 17h10 às 18h. Então, essa é a nossa programação de hoje, e nós então começamos com uma conferência agora, mas eu gostaria primeiro de apresentar nossas duas palestrantes. Margaret Catherine Harris Williams é psicanalista, escritora e artista plástica. Tem interesse particular na relação entre a psicanálise e a experiência estética, na poesia e nas artes visuais. Cursou inglês nas universidades de Oxford e Cambridge e estudou arte em Florença e no Reino Unido. Lecionou, além da Inglaterra, em vários países da Europa, América do Sul e Estados Unidos. Teve muitos artigos e capítulos de livros traduzidos para o italiano, francês, alemão, espanhol, português, grego e japonês. É editora da Harris Meltzer Trust, professora visitante do Tavistock Center. Frequentemente expõe trabalhos na Society of Women's Artists Annual Exhibition, e suas obras fazem parte de coleções particulares no país e no mundo. Aliás, ela trouxe gravuras que estão à venda nesse stand da Maura, no saguão, para quem estiver interessado. A Yancy Brandt de Souza Mello é psicanalista, ex-membro efetivo e ex-didata da Sociedade Brasileira de Psicanálise de Brasília e da Sociedade Brasileira de Psicanálise de São Paulo. Tem vários trabalhos publicados em coletâneas: Mente e Corpo em Psicanálise, em Alter, Revista Brasileira de Psicanálise, Revista ID, Nabokov Studies, e é autora do belo livro de poesias Idas e Vindas. Foi tradutora no seminário de Wilfred Bion em 1976 em Brasília e em 1978 em São Paulo. Então agora eu vou passar a palavra para a psicanalista Meg Harris Williams, que vai fazer a fala. Sua primeira fala é o tema Fé Psicanalítica, o desenvolvimento estético em Bion, Meltzer e Kierkegaard, que vocês têm traduzido em português. Acompanhe.
Thank you very much. I was very happy to be in Sao Paulo. I was here 6 years ago. Então ela está agradecendo, ela está muito feliz de estar de novo em São Paulo. Ela esteve aqui 6 anos atrás.
I just want to explain that
I'm not a psychoanalyst, I'm only a design.
Ela só quer deixar claro que ela não é uma psicanalista, ela é somente uma analisanda.
So, yes, I'm a writer and artist.
E uma escritora e uma artista.
So, shall I read Okay. I just read in English. Yes. Okay. Okay. This paper is called The Infant and the Infinite, on psychoanalytic faith in Bion, Meltzer and Kierkegaard. The nature of faith and its relation to belief, trust, doubt and despair is one of the oldest themes in existence, though relatively new in the language of psychoanalysis, owing to Freud's suspicion of religion in the post-Darwinian climate of his age. In this paper, I would like to explore the meaning of psychoanalytic faith as a real, not illusory, psychological factor, operating within the intimacy of the consulting room, as distinct from a body of dogma that regulates what may be believed by the faithful of psychoanalytic and religious churches. The philosopher William James, contemporaneous with Freud, pointed out that it was necessary to separate personal religion from institutional religion. He found in his study The Varieties of Religious Experience, 1902, that people's personal religions are as various as their personalities. One could locate faith as the means by which the individual infant, the protagonist of the psychoanalytic session, encounters the infinite, that is, the unbounded and unknown potentialities of its psychic development. This is a movement designated by Bion in Platonic religious terminology as oneness with O, or at-one-ment, a characteristic pun which he was nonetheless not the first to use, as he pointed out himself. The one being Godhead, or the Platonic form of the good or beautiful. In the following account, I shall be focusing on the idea of faith in the writings of psychoanalysts Wilfred Bion and Donald Meltzer, and indicating parallels with the idiosyncratically supreme philosopher of faith, Søren Kierkegaard, together with some examples from poetry to help the emotional impact of the term to become more imaginable. Bion introduced the term faith in Attention and Interpretation in 1970, and Meltzer in 1978 was the first to note and take up Bion's F-link as a serious theoretical stance. Since then, with some exceptions, for example, Eigen, 1981, Kristeva, 1987, Coulthard, 1986, Safran, 1999, Neri, 2005, and myself, 1997, 2010, and Rudy Vermote, 2011. The act of faith, as Bion termed it, has rarely been pursued in psychoanalytic writings in the intimate epistemological sense with which I am concerned here. And even when faith as a psychoanalytic orientation is defended, its meaning is often taken for granted. My starting point, therefore, is that, as in religion, faith only has meaning in terms of relationship to God, so in psychoanalysis, it only has meaning in terms of the relationship with internal objects. Not all psychoanalytic commentators would agree with this fundamental premise. Many use the concept as if synonymous with adamant optimism or dogged determination, in relation to the self and improved ego strength, in a context of freedom of will and creative illusion. This tends to reinforce the notion of faith as irrational, divorced from the world of facts and reason. However, as I hope to demonstrate, a glance at the poetic philosophic context, which analyzes this relationship in its own terms, will emphasize the view of faith as a means of knowing, not as a means of evading reality. An act of faith may indeed strengthen the infant ego, or it may shatter it. This is the danger of any catastrophic change that disturbs the status quo. But key to the destructive or creative potential is the link between ego and object, infant and infinity. Tolerance of doubt and tolerance of a sense of infinity are the linking factors in the growth of knowledge. That's Bion, 1962. This is not late Bion, it's just Bion. Those who consider faith to be a useful developmental concept observe that its function is to negotiate our relationship to the unknown, the future shape of the personality. It comes into play when the mind is on the threshold of an enlargement of vision, which is accompanied by an upheaval in established beliefs. Faith is a type of knowing, not a type of believing. As Bion says, I only believe when there is no fact available. Faith is the most mysterious way of knowing that we know about, accessible only through not knowing, or at times unknowing, the ultimate in negative capability. Unlike belief, which Bion points out is destroyed by facts, faith works constantly in tandem with doubt, and the faith-doubt orientations are part of a single, fluctuating movement. The extended psyche, to borrow Freud's term, has intimations of the infinite, without knowing it in any ordinary sense. Faith is to do with existing in the face of this awareness, not with avoidance. The K system is extended by the O system, as Bion says in 1970, that's attention and interpretation. Bion has been accused by some of inaccurately using the Platonic Kantian tradition in philosophy. However, as C.M. Woodhouse pointed out, this tradition has retained its vitality precisely because it may be constantly reinterpreted, whilst at the same time preserving its essential spirit and form, namely the potential to move between worlds, the real and ideal, the experienced and the innate. Roger Money-Curl divides both philosophers and psychoanalysts into nominalists or realists, followers of Plato. And both Bion and Meltzer are avowedly among the latter. For the realist idealists, the realm of internal objects and ideas is seen as a place which has a non-sensuous reality in the mind and is not merely a figure of speech. For some, the nominalists, the internal world is a metaphor only, as Bion puts it. For others, it is a reality that regulates our contact with and knowledge of the external world, as mapped out by Money-Curl in Man's Picture of His World in 1978. Both internal and external reality exist and are not merely postulated, imagined or believed in. Both, therefore, need to be observed and to become known, which is a scientific knowing activity. Religion, science, and art are, according to Bion, three vertices of knowledge, which need to be held in a creative tension. Indeed, in Bion's terms, owing to its fundamental part in these linkages, faith could be considered a special feature of learning from experience, at the heart of the entire process. As developed in attention and interpretation, an act of faith is seen as peculiar to scientific procedure, by which Bion means the discipline of enduring memory and desire that allows faith to operate in whatever field of investigation. The artist's O becomes apprehensible when it has been transformed into a work of art, a symbol. Carefully, in order to stress the emotional element of fear, he uses the verb apprehend rather than comprehend. Based on this emotionally complex attitude, he advocates an analogous state for psychoanalysts. It may be wondered, says Bion, what state of mind is welcome if desires and memories are not. A term that would express approximately what I need to express is faith. Faith that there is an ultimate reality and truth, the unknown, unknowable, formless infinite. In Bion's vivid metaphor, psychoanalysis is engaged in the hunt for that ferocious animal, absolute truth. A quarry which is, of course, never encountered. We only glimpse its coat, the stripes on the coat of the tiger. In conformity with the Neoplatonic view that noumenal truth enters the world of phenomena in pieces, cloaked to suit human comprehension. The important feature is that the human mind recognizes that the stripes derive from an infinite source of knowledge, an O system rather than a K system. They are simply aspects of the evolved O. The term infinite, used by Bion and the poets, is not the same as undifferentiated. Milton's formless infinite contains an infinite variety of forms, like Michelangelo's stone, from which the artist's attention and skill extracts a finite realization. Thus, the psychoanalyst's O, like the artist's, is already a transformation, one from the formless infinite, and set to work in a specific symbol-making setting. Symbol formation is an innate human tendency, part of the Kantian a priori equipment. Bion sees the self as an entity comprising both the psychic and the physical, as vividly illustrated in his story in the memoir of how mental life begins with the meeting of sperm and ovum, and is keen on merging the caesura between conscious and unconscious, as in the grid, replacing it with a series of logical steps towards abstraction. Mental life begins simultaneously with bodily existence, and dialogue within the psyche occurs instantaneously, with differentiation within the soma at some infinitely primitive level. Indeed, Klein's unconscious fantasy is by definition differentiated and applies to all mental movements, however primitive or sophisticated. The problem lies in detecting the differentiations, namely in developing the capacity for attention. Although it was Bion who first tried to re-establish religion within the psychoanalytic model of the mind, it was, according to Meltzer, already implicit in Melanie Klein's theological picture of object relations, in the form of the infant's trusting dependence on the object. He writes, "The vision implicit in Melanie Klein's discoveries about infantile mental life is that mental life is essentially religious, and that the growth of the mind is somehow inextricably tied up with the evolution of the relationship between the self and its internal objects. Consequently, death of the mind is entailed by these objects being expelled, dethroned, invaded, corrupted, or fragmented. Only when development gets stuck for narcissistic or masochistic reasons does the infant's projective worldview become a tyrannical one that believes in authority or submission, and consequently requires illusion as an antidote, a comforter. I hope to demonstrate the difference between this perverse, or at least not useful, type of belief and faith. It is helpful to bear in mind that belief and faith are different types of word. Belief can be an ordinary or an abstract noun, but faith, which is solely abstract, except when used in the sense of dogma, is more specific, so consequently has a much narrower range of meanings. Faith is, equally with belief, an innate feature of human mentality, one which, as James said, is inextricable from the impulse to take life strivingly that is indestructible in the race. Through the maximal stimulating power of faith, the infinite perspective opens out. Yet Freud's original paternalistic view is still commonly held of religion as fulfilling a perverse need for a punitive superego that then stimulates rebellion or the need for consolation. And the popular maternalistic view of a comforting Earth Mother who masochistically retires into nonentity in order to allow the infant free rein is perhaps an equally pessimistic idea of internal deity. There is a fundamental divergence, therefore, between the post-Freudian religious discussions that continue to focus on the future of an illusion and the post-Kleinian or Bionian picture of the infant self developing in association with the potentially infinite development of its internal objects, that is, through contact with reality. This allows for beliefs to change and develop as a result of acts of faith that occur at a certain point according to an evolving O. The infant or analysand needs ultimately to identify with the evolution of O, not with the parent or analyst as a person. Bion concludes attention and interpretation with the words, "What is to be sought is an activity that is both the restoration of God, the Mother, and the evolution of God, the formless, infinite, ineffable, non-existent, which can only be found in the state in which there is no memory, desire, or understanding." Thus, in psychoanalytic terms, the leap of faith results in the internalization of the evolutionary aspect of the object. It involves overcoming envy of the growth-stimulating objects and entails an advance in the structure of the personality, so is never just an acquired piece of information that can be selected and stored by the self, subject, without any help from the object. Reparation, restored internal deity, introjection, incarnation, is not enough. It is not just the mental food which is required, but also the digestive function of the object, as Manny Curl puts it. That is, the capacity to think, restoration and evolution together. In a series of mediations, the object itself has to be more than God the Mother. It has to be in touch with the ineffable evolutionary O, the source of objectness. in order to ensure its own participation in a developmental process rather than a fixed moral or doctrinal system. In this picture of personality development, faith is not an optional extra in the armory of the psyche. It is essential to truth-seeking. The alternative to F-faith, writes Meltzer, is F-fiend, to succumb to lies invented by the ego, the narcissistic infant self, ending in being a lie. Meltzer says, truth requires submission under the vertexes of L, K, and if possible F, where the value is creating rather than destroying. The great poets such as Shakespeare and Homer, according to Bion, could penetrate a state of mind that did not yet exist, ours. They could intuit mental events through a capacity for deep symbolization that he equates with an act of faith. He says, an act of faith has as its background something that is unconscious and unknown because it has not happened. So faith operates in the area of the not yet existing, heralding the future, not of political or social events, but of mental events that are yet to be realized, whether in cultural or individual terms, instants away or centuries. Later, they come true. That is, they are experienced by one or another mind. This type of imagination, supremely the poetic imagination, was defined by Kierkegaard as the medium of infinitization. In other words, the basis for a movement of faith, which can only occur when the self has arrived at one of those developmental modes at which a future shape or existence is sensed. At such points of catastrophic change, Bion suggests the personality is faced with three possible alternatives. The commensal route of non-reactive coexistence, or the parasitic or destructive one, or the symbiotic or fruitful conjunction. Alistair Hannay, Kierkegaard's translator and scholar, asks, may the relation to religion be discussed profitably in terms of some alternative theology, one which will allow the Kierkegaardian insights to throw light on and enrich our grasp of human being? To which we may answer, yes, psychoanalysis could be seen as such an alternative theology. Meltzer read and was impressed by Kierkegaard, and although there does not seem to be any specific references to him in Bion's writings, Bion's picture of mental growth through the transference process has been compared by David Walters to that of Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard, the founder of existentialist philosophy and an acute psychologist, took faith as his underlying formative theme, the basis for being and becoming. He used a series of pseudonyms to free his arguments from his own persona and to enable different internal points of view to find a voice in the discussion. Like Bion, who says that O, or the thing in itself, is best described as passionate love, Kierkegaard saw faith as a passion on a par with love, fear, awe, etc. Like Bion, who warned that knowledge about something may be the outcome of a defense against the consequences of an act of faith, Kierkegaard knew that passionate commitment is something which human nature always tries to resist. Classification is preferable to emotionality founded on primitive impressions of existence, he writes sarcastically. One does not love, does not have faith, does not act, but one knows what erotic love is, what faith is. His lifelong analysis of the nature of faith was set in motion by questioning his own motives in renouncing his engagement to a girl named Regine. This led him to conclude that he himself did not have faith. He said, "If I had had faith, I would have stayed with Regine." He came up with many rational, even noble excuses for avoiding marriage, but he knew it was really a failure of faith. Kierkegaard takes faith to be meaningful only on a personal level, not a cultural or social one. Faith concerns the project of the selfhood, namely the individual's quest for identity, the quest to become himself, which he recognizes to be a task instinctively avoided, observing that people naturally prefer to cloak themselves in some fictional or substitute identity. But identity cannot be chosen, but rather is given, and is only fulfilled through passionate experience. Kierkegaard writes, "Every movement of infinity occurs with passion, and no reflection can bring about a movement. That's the perpetual leap in life which explains the movement. In passion, the existing subject is infinitized in the eternity of imagination, and yet is also most definitely himself. This infinitizing movement takes place in the eternity of imagination in Blakean terms, and is the equivalent of Bion's alignment with O. For Kierkegaard, as with others in the Neoplatonic tradition, faith is envisaged as enabling a synthesis of finite and infinite. Thus, it is not good enough to renounce worldly desires and relationships, however virtuous this may appear. This is an incomplete spiritual movement. The finite mind cannot dematerialize. Rather, through faith, the infinite is incorporated in earthly form in a transformation. Coleridge, in the same tradition, distinguishes an imaginative symbol which partakes of infinity from a mechanical sign or allegory which is a man-made container for information. Kierkegaard explains further that when the subject or person is infinitized, he does not merely know himself in a theoretical way, but he actually becomes himself in an existential transformation, as in Bion's definition of the function of a psychoanalysis. Reflection and pathos, according to Kierkegaard, represent two contrary ways of coming to knowledge, analogous to Bion's knowing about versus learning from experience, K and O systems. He is scathing about Hegel as representing the former. No amount of reflection or dialectical argument can substitute for what is essentially a movement of pathos felt on the pulses. In psychoanalysis, a correct interpretation may be incorrectly delivered, as for example when used as a projective defense, as Manny Curl describes. Indeed, a total reliance on reflection, free from any taint of the mystical or intuitive, Manny Curl's valid intuition, is liable to result in infinite resignation, which is satirized by Kierkegaard as a form of moral complacency, self-satisfying but stultifying. To resign oneself to loss or loss of contact, pretending that one values only the infinite, not the earthly, is actually an evasion of passion. He distinguished necessary suffering from religious masochism, and made it quite clear that it is an error to believe that sorrow is more meritorious than joy, he wrote in a journal. Movements of faith, he said, are accompanied by moments of light-heartedness and humour. In Bion's terms, by the fleeting experience of security, a sense of aesthetic harmony gained after a sustained period of patience. In contrast to the assumptions of religious or doctrinal fundamentalism, faith does not lead to death, but to life, which is harder to tolerate. To the existing personality, of course, faith is an absurd movement, though Kierkegaard is careful to make a distinction between the absurd and nonsense. The absurd is the way to advance the project of the selfhood, which progresses in a series of small but radical transitions like Bion's catastrophic change, rather than through argument and dialectic. Indeed, like Bion's LHK, Kierkegaard's definition of existence is a capacity to hold emotional elements in tension, as distinct from arguing for one at the expense of another. Tolerating this tension leads to a leap, which is the antithetical alternative to the will, the psychic tool of the narcissistic infantile ego. The leap occurs in the gap between old and new knowledge, which makes a space for what Bion calls psyche lodgement in the memoir. This is a place where memory and desire are not. When an individual comes to the boundary between his own existence and his potential future existence, Kierkegaard says, he has come to the border of the wondrous, as in Meltzer's use of the word amazement. It is a boundary which implies religious atonement, as in Bion's use, and results in repetition on a higher plane of existence. Green, 1998. Kierkegaard's repetition is thus, in Kleinian terms, a type of infinitized reparation in the face of the depressive position. That is, it is not beyond the depressive position, but is a particular facet of the infant's dependence, accepting the reality of an imminent sea change and incorporating some of the objects infinitizing or developmental pull. Cutting the link of faith leads us to the object's deprivation and impotence, which is omnipotence, and unable to help the infant self. So when the tension of LHK is found intolerable, and the leap to catastrophic change is not made, there is a temptation to minus LHK, that is, to inventing lies about the self and its relation to internal objects, which at their extreme may lead to despair. It is despair, not doubt, that is the antithesis to faith. Despair is defined by Kierkegaard as wanting to be rid of oneself. It betrays itself in those who claim to want to be themselves, but exclude the thought of having been established by a power, and who are thus not real but pseudo-selves. Pseudo-selves are those whose identity is defined solely in relation to others in society, and have no sense that their identity is established by an internal power or godlike object. They are outward-looking, not inward-looking, as Kierkegaard says. They are not clarified. Here again, Kierkegaard's language echoes closely that of William Blake. And psychology tells us that we may be different people at different moments, faithful or despairing, existing or non-existing, being ourselves or pretending to be someone else. So the parallels are clear, I hope, between the poetic, religious, philosophical views of faith and the Bion-Meltzer post-Kleinian model of the mind. Meltzer adopted Bion's linkage of LHK in his 1988 formulation of aesthetic conflict. in which the infant's simultaneous love and hate of its ambiguous mother with her inscrutable inner world is resolved through an awakening of the desire for knowledge. This may take a constructive, scientific or artistic form, or both, or alternatively, the pain of not knowing may be perverted into a fantasy of intrusive manipulation of the object's interior. In the doubt-faith oscillation, as in Bion's PSD, we see the infant's aesthetic conflict as founded on its love-hate reaction to the beauty of its mother's face, a dazzling sun immediately qualified by flitting clouds. The tension between love and hate gives birth to curiosity about the mother's internal world, the source of all further investigations, both internal and external, and the basis for the establishment of a sense of reality. This search for knowledge leads to developmental catastrophic change, as aspects of truth are ingested by the self in a perpetual process of becoming. It is also clear that there is a major distinction between the post-Kleinian Platonic orientation of Bion and Meltzer, which is aligned with that of the poet-philosophers, and the Freudian instinctual orientation of those who regard the desire for knowledge as an autonomous instinct that simply gets mixed up with love and hate, as in Britton, rather than springing of necessity from the emotional tension between infant and mother, with implications for fantasies about the worlds that the mother represents. Indeed, the essentially post-Freudian view forgets the Kleinian emphasis on the mother's internal world as the primary object of the infant's curiosity, the infant's first intimations of O and its first cognitive steps being founded on the part-object relationships of the feeding experience, as in Money Curl. The essential feature of the Kleinian tradition is the fact of the infant mind's dependence on internal objects for all real knowledge and all real personality development. Bion and Meltzer, following the poet-philosophers, insist that this type of developmental dependence relies on the capacity for faith. Meltzer says that Bion's idea of faith is not like the child swimming for the first time without water wings, confident of daddy's support, but is more like floating free in shark-infested waters. This is the required leap of faith. But it does also acknowledge the role of daddy's support as the ethics of existing knowledge are superseded and refined in a continuing evolutionary process. The language of psychoanalytic theory is notoriously poor when it comes to evoking experiences of pathos as distinct from recollection. That is, emotionality rather than interpretation. For this reason, I would like to offer a couple of poetic examples to illustrate, through analogy, what faith looks and feels like. Poets have often expressed their faith in poetry in terms of a commitment not just to a specific muse or inspiring figure, but to the muse's operation in a particular poem. Their metaphors offer a template for other relationships which require faith. The possibility of an act of faith occurs in response to an emotional disturbance such as love, beauty, mortality. When faith is allowed to operate, the poet, him or herself, is placed in a position of being used as a mediator, a vehicle for conveying the poem's knowledge. As Rimbaud said, "It is wrong to say I think, rather I am thought." Poets are required by their muse to express some special, idiosyncratic, yet universal knowledge, first felt on their own pulses and then captured for other readers to identify with. The apprehension of an aesthetic object or poem initiates a movement out of the existing self, experienced as a sense of service to a power beyond their own. This movement is a perennial theme of poetry. The poet Emily Dickinson described herself as a loaded gun, who in writing poetry, or rather this particular poem, felt she was carried away by a master force, her owner. My life had stood a loaded gun in corners till a day the owner passed, identified, and carried me away. And now we roam in sovereign woods, and now we hunt the doe, and every time I speak for him, the mountains straight reply. The crux of the matter is the word identified, whose double sense implies both that the poet has been recognized by the owner, the internal or love object, and that she has become one with the originator or the experience that ensues. I becomes we. In this way, the gun of her life is transformed into the poems which speak out every time I speak for him, and elicit a response from the world, the mountains. My second example is an extract from Faith and Love, a poem by Roland Harris, who was an Alexander Bionz in the 1960s. He was also my father. The poem was written in the 1940s in response to reading the theologian psychologist Thomas Aquinas. It begins, "The three substitutes in love for faith are memory, hope, and sudden death. Memory, hope, and death are non-passionate substitutes that escape from turbulence by too easily relinquishing the aesthetic or love object." Aquinas wrote, "For those with faith, no explanation is necessary. For those without, no explanation is possible. Explanation belongs to the realm of memory and desire, of knowing about, not of learning from experience. Contact with the disturbing new idea or aesthetic object may be avoided with the excuse that it is unattainable. Avoidance may take the form of replacing faith with some more comfortable emotion, or even result in extinction of the idea. As Bion points out, it is not only bodies that may be killed, but also ideas. A fetal idea may kill or be killed, and that is not a metaphor only. He means that a metaphor may actually contain a fetal idea, in line with the Neoplatonic view that a new idea can only be contained in a symbol. But the mind may or may not be prepared to receive it and make that link with the infinite. Using a metaphor very similar to Emily Dickinson's, Harris continues, "Out of the waste of sky, invisible arrows of beauty and danger, when the strong stranger bends me and trains his eye. The bow, like the gun, is not used by the poet, it is the poet. The poet himself is used by a stranger, a visitor from the realms of the unknown." Harris continues to describe the parts of the personality that dare not commit themselves to faith and that therefore counsel against passionate experience. The voices crying, "Beware, beware, a false happiness is sadder than despair," have the intense substitute for experience. Fearful of being let down, the cautious mind seeks an alternative, a substitute for experience. Memory, hope, desire, prudence. How can one distinguish between the real thing and its various substitutes, which may feel equally intense or be even more satisfying? This is surely the central dilemma of the psychoanalytic consulting room, the choice between comfortable familiarity and the painful reality of the unknown experience that is trying to make an entrance into the space created by the turbulent proximity of two minds, as Bion describes. The problem which faces psychoanalysts, as it has always faced religious priests, is to avoid parasitic dependence on the faith of past pioneers, and instead to free the operation of faith in their patients, which itself relies on the operation of faith in their own minds and practice. Martha Harris warned against rigidifying the memory of those who were faithful pioneers by turning them instead into dogmatic guardians of the faith. She writes, "The dependent group structure so often manifests itself in the reliance upon a crystallized selection of the theories of Freud, the original Messiah, sometimes pitted against a similar extrapolation from Melanie Klein, a Latter-day Saint. Bion is unlikely to escape the same fate." Psychoanalysis, if we have any faith in the process, should teach us self-scrutiny, not doctrinal allegiance, which is an illusory way to preserve psychoanalytic knowledge, and essentially non-analytic in its possessiveness and idolatry. The danger is that the group guardians, by concentrating on dick rather than pathos, rules rather than discipline in Bion's sense, are liable to lose touch with the poetic spirit of the pioneers. But neither is psychoanalysis a love story in which faith is defined as aiming to restore the power of infant illusion. Chris Daver. In terms of the analyst's personal emotions, Bion emphasizes, as Freud did, the need to seek a neutral or objective perspective beyond individual love or hate. A major difficulty in maintaining the therapeutic transference relationship being the struggle to be disciplined to remain analysts rather than succumbing to either love or hate, to refrain from omnipotently trying to be helpful, as distinct from enabling pain talk. By pain talk, Bion, of course, does not mean masochism. He means the kind of suffering associated with patience. Hence, the experience of sadness originating in that relationship. The Tibresid position that does not need to be overcome or gone beyond, but simply to be undergone. Bion regarded this as the gaining of wisdom, as distinct from being so well educated that we are unable to be wise. To relinquish infantile omnipotence and allow internal objects to do the thinking requires faith in a process which relies on the transference from internal objects to enable the analyst to seem to perform functions for the patient that are essential to the development of their thinking, writes Meltzer. To be wise is to retain faith in the process rather than in the personal capacities of the analyst. To respond analytically rather than parentally, says Meltzer. And this is dependent on the analyst's tolerance of negative capability, Keats's term now generally used as the best depiction of the analytic process. What the infant needs is not illusion, but infinity. And the psychoanalytic process is the aesthetic object that can combine both God the Mother and the ineffable, and be a metaphorical container for states of mind yet unknown. In conclusion, to have faith in someone means to have faith in the quality of their internal objects. To have faith in the psychoanalytic process means to have faith in the possibility of a conversation between the internal objects, says Meltzer, of two minds. The transference relationship takes place in a space which is beyond either of the individual minds, but is shaped by their turbulent encounter. Faith in the process is faith in the infinite unfolding of this encounter. Thank you.
Muito obrigada, Meg Harris. Agora vamos abrir os comentários, perguntas.
Queria saber uma coisa. Fico pensando em algumas das imagens. Arma carregada, um bebê flutuando no oceano infestado de tubarões. Na busca pela verdade, né? Fico pensando, eu acho muito bonita a ideia da fé como uma paixão. É uma paixão sem um objeto definido. Uma paixão pela busca, né? A minha pergunta é que se a gente tem esse desespero todo na busca pela verdade, se o vínculo K não é então a mais poderosa das paixões.
I think, if I understand correctly, I remember something that Meltzer said about LHK.
Se ela compreendeu bem a pergunta, ela lembra de algo que o Meltzer disse dos vínculos L e HK.
Which is that the passion exists in the tension between the different emotions of L, H, and K.
Can you repeat that?
The passion exists in the tension between
A paixão existe na tensão entre
the three emotions L, H, K.
os três LHK.
And he compared it to tuning a violin in fifths rather than note by note. He compared it to tuning a musical stringed instrument like a violin, to tuning it in fifths, not to tuning it by individual notes.
Okay. Comparando com o tocar de violino. Isso, vocês podem me ajudar, gente, por favor. Afinação de violino.
Because the point is the resonance between the emotions against each other. The resonance, which is the passion, comes from the resonance between the emotions all together. Does that make sense?
Understand
The resonance. The resonance.
Right.
Yeah. Comes from hearing the different emotions all together at the same time.
A ressonância, ela vem de você poder escutar todas as emoções juntas ao mesmo tempo.
So that is like a description of passion.
Essa seria a descrição de uma paixão.
It's hearing all the different emotions together.
Escutar todas as emoções juntamente.
Does that make sense? But the K aspect,
O aspecto caótico,
which Bjorn calls curiosity,
que o Bion chamou de curiosidade,
has a kind of rescuing function.
Tem um tipo de função de busca, de resgate.
Yeah.
Obrigada.
É mais um pedido. Se ela podia falar um pouquinho mais sobre essa oposição entre dialética e pathos. E o segundo pedido, uma pergunta. Vou fazer uma pergunta. O que é que ela acha que tanto nos escritos de Nelson quanto nos de Bion não há nenhuma alusão à poesia moderna, só a poesia romântica e eventualmente a língua clássica.
I do the second bit first.
What?
I'll do the second bit first.
Ela vai tentar responder a segunda parte primeiro.
Because that's quite quick, really, because it simply reflects their individual knowledge, their individual reading. It's chance.
É mais simples responder porque simplesmente reflete,
Yeah, I mean,
reflects
their individual acquaintance with literature.
a aquisição individual da literatura.
I mean, Meltzer did not really read poetry until quite late in his life.
Meltzer, na verdade, não leu muito poesia até certa altura da vida dele.
Yes. Whereas Bion always read poetry, but only certain poetry that he knew.
Já Bion sempre leu muita poesia.
Like the classics and the romantic poets and Milton.
Os clássicos, os românticos, como Milton.
He even said he couldn't read Shakespeare. He could only understand Shakespeare if it was performed as a play.
Ele disse que, inclusive, não conseguia alcançar Shakespeare, somente quando performar numa encenado.
Yeah. He said we rely on the mediation of the actors. We rely on the mediation of the actors.
Nós confiamos, né, na mediação dos atores.
But I think that's true of all relationships. They are all mediating relationships.
Mas isso é verdade em todos os tipos de relação. A gente está sempre mediando relações.
Depending on internal objects of the other person.
Dependendo de objetos internos
of the other person.
Da outra pessoa, da comunicação.
Even if it is a poet.
Mesmo que seja de poeta.
Or an actual person, or anything.
Ou qualquer pessoa. Ou qualquer coisa.
And then the other bit about dialectic.
Now, agora a sua primeira questão sobre a dialética.
Those are the words that are used by Kierkegaard.
Essas foram as palavras usadas por Kierkegaard.
It seems to me there is a very strong parallel between Kierkegaard's distinction and that of Bion. A very strong similarity.
Eu acredito que existe uma similaridade muito forte entre Kierkegaard e Bion.
Yeah, because Kierkegaard says there is a pathos versus dialectic.
Kierkegaard acredita que pathos está de um lado e a dialética de outro.
And I think that's very similar to Bion, knowing versus knowing about.
E isso é muito similar ao knowing do Bion, que é o conhecer, e o knowing about, que é conhecer sobre.
Yeah, is different words, but the same kind of distinction.
São trabalhos diferentes, mas diferenças da mesma qualidade.
That's why Kierkegaard is quite sarcastic when he says, I don't love, but I know everything about love, or something like that.
Por isso que Kierkegaard é um tanto sarcástico quando ele diz, eu não amo, mas eu...
But I know everything about love.
Ela já está sabendo português, mas eu sei tudo sobre o amor. Eu não amo, mas eu sei tudo sobre o amor.
Yeah, it's a kind of joke.
Thank you for your help. Ele é um tipo de canalha.
Eu gostaria que a Meg pudesse falar um pouco sobre esta proposta de Bion, de que a antítese entre infinito e finito é mais operativa metapsicologicamente do que a antítese freudiana entre consciente e inconsciente.
Sim, são coisas diferentes.
Yes, because I think that with Bion, everything is unconscious, really.
Com Bion, na verdade, tudo é inconsciente.
In his model of thinking, thinking is really all unconscious.
No seu modelo de pensamento.
But I think the difference between finite and infinite is to do with the internal objects.
Mas a diferença entre finito e infinito tem a ver com os objetos internos.
Because like finite can represent the knowledge that has already been acquired and is part of the structure of the personality.
O finito corresponde a conhecimento que já foi adquirido na parte da personalidade.
So it's like in the realm of K.
Sorry?
It is like in the realm of K, in the field of K. Of K knowledge.
No reino de K.
Yeah.
Realm of K.
Whereas the infinite is to do with the relationship to an internal object that is continuing to evolve.
E o infinito tem a ver com um objeto que está continuamente evoluindo.
And therefore that is the field or the realm of O.
Esforço que está no reino do O.
So it is the difference between existing knowledge and potential knowledge.
Essa é a diferença do conhecimento já existente e do conhecimento ainda em potencial.
But the potential knowledge depends on the infant believing that the object is not static but is evolving.
Mas o conhecimento potencial depende da fé do infante, né? Acreditar, to believe that
the object is not static but is continually evolving.
Que ele acredite que o objeto não está estático, mas que ele está continuamente evoluindo.
Or he also says that the container contained is a flexible relationship.
Ele também diz que o continente e o contido são flexible.
Flexible can move, like move.
Yeah, é flexível. You said it's flexible?
It's flexible.
It's flexible.
It's
É flexível.
The container is flexible, yes. Yes.
O continente é flexível.
Yes. So the infant has to believe that the object can expand as much as is necessary.
Então o infante ele tem que acreditar que o objeto pode expandir o tanto que for necessário.
Even infinitely.
Mesmo que seja infinitamente.
And that's what I believe Bion means when he says intersection with O.
É isso que eu acredito que Bion quer dizer quando ele fala da intersecção com o O.
Quando Melanie Klein escreveu Inveja e Gratidão, ela quase que selou o destino da percepção como julgamento, né? A questão seria, basicamente, a gente percebe ou julga. O que viria antes, julgamento ou percepção? Se quiser pôr uma origem, pode pôr o que vem antes. Eu invejo, ou eu invejo, né? I don't see. Or I envy. Eu queria saber, na verdade, como é que é possível acessar a fé.
Oh, I see. Oh, right. Yes. I see. Yes.
Se eu julgo antes de ver. Ou seja, eu sinto algo que me indica algo do objeto que me proíbe o contato com esse objeto. Como eu chegaria, então, ao maravilhamento?
Eu também quero saber. Oh, meu Deus, né?
Well, I don't know if I'm answering it really, but I just say what I think.
Eu não sei se eu vou conseguir responder, mas só vou dizer o que eu acho, o que eu penso.
I mean, what you say reminds me of what Bion said when he said that the problematic type of envy is envy of the growth-stimulating objects.
A questão problemática da inveja é a inveja dos objetos,
the growth-stimulating objects.
Os objetos desenvolvedores que estimulam o crescimento. Obrigada, Daniel. A inveja desses objetos que estimulam o crescimento. Essa que é a inveja problemática. Go on.
So it's part of the same system as the desire to avoid growth. You know, Bion believes that instinctively we try to avoid growth.
Bion acredita que instintivamente a gente tenta evitar o crescimento.
But on the other hand, we have a need for truth. So that is his expression of the same conflict.
Por outro lado, a gente tem essa necessidade da busca pela verdade. Então, se estabelece um conflito.
Yeah, his version of Klein's envy versus gratitude.
É a versão dele do conflito de Klein, inveja e gratidão.
But some people, like, Meltzer and also Mani Curl, they describe two different kinds of envy.
Alguns, como Monikar
and Meltzer, yes.
Eles descrevem um tipo diferente, a different type
of envy.
De inveja, tipo diferente de inveja.
Mani Curl, especially, I remember. He describes, he says that envy is actually very necessary, very useful emotion.
Para Monikar, a inveja, na verdade, é muito necessária.
Because,
muito útil.
Because without envy, there is no aspiration.
Sem inveja não há aspiração.
And I think that is similar to Bion saying you need love and hate together.
E isso é similar ao que o Bion fala, que a gente precisa do amor e ódio juntos.
Because without L and H, there is no K, there is no curiosity.
Without?
L and H.
Sem o L e o H.
There is no K, no curiosity.
There is no K, não tem K, não tem curiosidade. Não tem o K, não tem curiosidade. O conhecimento.
So there's good envy and bad envy.
Então tem a inveja boa e a inveja ruim.
There's envy which stimulates growth, and there's envy which stops growth.
A inveja que estimula o crescimento e a que paralisa o conhecimento. O crescimento. Growth. Crescimento.
Growth, yes, yes. Yes. What's that? Oh, judgment, yes, judgment. Well, I think moral judgment is a problem of Kleinian analysts.
Ela acredita que o julgamento moral é um problema de analistas kleinianos.
I think
There are a lot of them here.
yes.
Most of them.
Yeah. But they agree, I think. I think this is why that little quotation from something that my mother wrote.
Little?
Quotation from my mother, this one.
A citação da mãe dela, que está no artigo.
I think she is saying the same thing about the dependent group structure.
Quando ela fala do grupo dependente, just a moment.
This one here. Later, I think.
Later.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
No.
It's after the poem.
After the poem?
Yeah, after the poem, after.
Ok.
Yeah,
a estrutura do grupo dependente. I will just read.
Okay, yes, yeah.
A estrutura do grupo dependente muitas vezes manifesta-se na confiança em uma seleção cristalizada das teorias de Freud, o Messias original, às vezes confrontada com uma extrapolação similar de Melanie Klein. É improvável que Bion escape do mesmo destino.
Yeah. I think what she's saying is that, well, not only Kleinians, but all groups try to rigidify theory into a moral attitude. Try to rigidify theory so it becomes a moral attitude. It becomes dogma, a moral judgment. Theory becomes a moral judgment, a dogma. In other words, that this is the danger that always exists.
Esse é um perigo que está sempre aí.
It's not only Kleinians, but that's just the example.
Não é só uma questão dos ser kleinianos, foi só exemplo.
Yeah. And so, like Bion would say, the danger is you have a theory which seems quite a good theory, and you turn it into a dogma. And dogma is the opposite of faith.
Você tem uma teoria e você transforma a teoria em dogma, e isso é o oposto de fé.
Yeah.
Baby do dogma. But babies do dogmas. Babies are dogmatic.
Well, I think at all stages
Os
of life.
bebês são dogmáticos, sorry.
All stages of life, baby, adult, anybody.
Todos os estágios da vida, bebês, adultos.
They have the same temptation exists, whether to be dogmatic or whether to progress.
Tem sempre essa tentação de ser dogmático ou de progredir.
It's like Bion likes this term endoskeleton and exoskeleton.
O Bion tem esse termo, né, de endoesqueleto e exoesqueleto. O Bion usa o termo endoesqueleto e exoesqueleto.
Yes. And he's always saying the problem is that we are endoskeletonous creatures, but we create an exoskeleton for ourselves.
Ele diz que nós somos criaturas de endoesqueletos, mas que nós acabamos criando um exoesqueleto para nós mesmos.
Which actually kills the mind.
Que mata a mente. Né? Obrigada.
Eu agradeço também a referência, muito interessante. Eu queria perguntar o seguinte, a contratransferência como experiência sensível, ela poderia ser compreendida, ou melhor, como compreender o que você pensa da contratransferência como essa, se ela estiver inserida numa epistemologia do pathos, né? Como é que você vê essa possibilidade, então, do tornar-se do analista na relação com o paciente para produzir, não sei se é para produzir um conhecimento, ou o conhecimento seria o tornar-se mesmo. Se a gente pode pensar a relação do analista e do analisando os seus objetos internos, a gente pensaria alguma coisa de comum que estaria no horizonte do tornar-se?
Yes, I think that is the modern description of psychoanalysis.
Essa é a descrição moderna da psicanálise.
Which is that the relationship between transference and countertransference is evolving, is a process of becoming, never of attaining. Never a process of attaining, it's a process of becoming.
O processo de transferência e contra-transferência, essa visão moderna da psicanálise é essa evolução da transferência contra transferência, mas não no sentido de
chegar numa meta.
To reach. Okay, go on.
Yeah. Well, it's like Bion says, I'm not a psychoanalyst, I'm becoming a psychoanalyst.
Como o Bion dizia, eu não sou psicanalista, eu estou me tornando, I'm becoming analista.
And in the same way, you can say the definition of psychoanalysis is to demonstrate to the patient how to become themselves.
E a definição da psicanálise nesse sentido seria demonstrar ao analisando como tornar-se si mesmo.
So, but it means there is a need for the analyst to be always becoming.
Tem aí uma necessidade do analista estar sempre se tornando.
So they show like an example of a mind that is continually thinking, continually becoming, continually changing, and the patient can interject the example.
É um exemplo de uma mente que está sempre, continuamente se tornando. E isso fica como exemplo para o paciente. Right?
Então, eu tenho uma pergunta para fazer, mas antes eu queria agradecer a beleza do texto. E o infante e o infinito. E a partir dessa evocação, o infante que todos somos, queria perguntar a respeito da fé como pré-concepção. Uma pré-concepção, uma potencialidade de cada um que pode evoluir, né, expandir ou não. Se ela vê dessa forma, como... Então, essa seria a minha pergunta. Muito obrigada.
Você perguntou da fé como uma pré-concepção, depois...
A pré-concepção que evolui forte. Então, como uma pré-concepção, estava sendo profunda. Nessa ideia do infante, como alguma coisa vir a ser, né, a pré-concepção que já está lá desde o nascimento, como um potencial de cada um que se expande ou não. Então, seria essa a pergunta, a fé como uma pré-concepção, se ela vir dessa forma.
Well, I think preconception is a word that can be used two ways.
A gente pode usar essa palavra, entender essa palavra de duas formas.
So, one way is a preconception that prevents a conception.
Uma é que a preconcepção é impedindo a concepção.
Because it means that whatever is already known is used to block knowing anything new.
Tudo que já é sabido é usado para bloquear o novo.
But the other way is like the Platonic system.
A outra forma seria a forma platônica,
which Money, Curl and Bion also use.
que Money, Carl e Bion também se utilizaram.
So it's like the idea that there is a whole world of ideas, Platonic world of ideas,
Tem um mundo inteiro aí de ideias platônicas,
which exists and does not need a thinker.
que existem e não precisam de pensadores.
What Bion calls a thought without a thinker.
O que Bion chamou de um pensamento sem pensador.
But then the way that this world intersects with the infant mind
Mas a forma que esse mundo intercepta o pensamento do infante, a mente do infante,
is like the infant has a preconception of this idea.
o infante tem uma preconcepção dessas ideias.
And then it encounters something in its life which can be a realization.
E daí ele encontra alguma coisa na sua vida que pode ser uma realização.
Bion always uses the example of the newborn baby has a preconception of the breast.
Bion sempre usou o exemplo do bebê recém-nascido que tem uma preconcepção do seio.
And then when there is a realization of a breast, that is the first conception, the first thought.
E quando ele tem uma realização positiva, né, do seio, ele tem aí a formação da concepção.
But the baby must have faith that there is such a thing as a breast.
Mas o bebê tem que ter fé de que existe alguma coisa como o seio.
So yeah, the faith is part of the same system.
Então sim, a fé é parte do mesmo sistema.
Yeah.
Ainda sobre o impacto estético aqui do seu texto. Mas eu estava pensando aqui que muitas vezes, como agora há pouco, né, o objeto interno ele é aproximado da ideia de uma mãe. E nessa relação que tem entre o divino e uma mãe, eu fico pensando o quanto que esse divino também não poderia se aproximar de um casal ou até mesmo de um grupo. Mas ficando com a ideia de uma mãe, existe um momento específico dessa mãe que ela está em relação com o pai. É um momento em que ela está numa relação com o pai. No qual ela tanto está sendo reparada, sofrendo uma reparação, né? Quanto ela está sendo fecundada, portanto ela vai estar numa situação de criatividade. É um momento da... Eu acho que de alguma maneira junta dois aspectos que você apontou no seu texto, né? Da reparação da mãe, desse contato com o infinito, que está para quem, né? Então isso me faz pensar na ideia da relação que cada um de nós tem com isso que poderia ser chamado uma pré-concepção, a cena primária. Eu acho que também dá uma abertura para a entrada do pensamento freudiano, de alguns desenvolvimentos do pensamento freudiano. Então, se eu pensar que esse casal está vivendo uma coisa que, por um lado, foi aquilo que me gerou e que me gera, e, por outro lado, ele poderia produzir irmãos que, de alguma maneira, me ameaçam. Eu fico pensando se as ideias que esse casal está gerando e que eu poderei ou não ser porta-voz, dar a luz a eles, deixar que eles nasçam. Eu fico pensando assim, se os pensamentos, as produções não seriam como que irmãos, num certo sentido, do eu mesmo. As produções, produção artística. E só para terminar, se a mente que evita a própria criatividade não se comporta como os tubarões, já que você citou uma parte da referência dos tubarões, né? Porque outro dia, com espanto, eu ouvi dizer que os tubarões, eles dentro do útero da mãe, tubarões, eles têm que se comer uns aos outros porque só um vai nascer.
Parece sério.
It's the whole family situation.
Essa é a situação da família toda.
But yes, I think the internal object. I think the idea is that whilst initially the internal object is equivalent to the mother.
Sim, os objetos internos. A ideia de que os objetos internos são equivalentes à mãe, ela concorda com isso.
I think, in fact, even at the very beginning, it's a combined object that the father is contained in the mother.
No começo, inclusive, os objetos estão combinados. O pai está combinado com a mãe.
In a similar way that the first object is the breast and nipple.
Assim como os primeiros objetos são o seio e o mamilo.
So the breast has different aspects to it. There's the feeding aspect, and there's also the aspect that controls the baby's access to the breast.
Então tem um aspecto da alimentação do seio e o controle que o bebê acredita que ele exerce sobre o seio.
And those seem to be like the origins of male and female concepts.
E esses parecem ser as origens dos conceitos de feminino e masculino,
Yes, the first idea of the masculine and the feminine.
A primeira ideia do feminino e do masculino.
Is both contained in the breast and the baby's first experience of the breast.
Os dois estão ali no seio, misturados no seio.
And I mean, Manny Curl is very good on this when he describes concept formation.
O Manny Curl, ele descreve isso muito bem quando ele fala da formação da concepção.
He says that every concept is founded on the fantasy of the internal parental intercourse.
Internal
parental intercourse. Internal mother-father intercourse. The internal object.
Todo o processo de concepção tem a ver com o coito entre pai e mãe. Internos.
Yes, and he thinks the baby learns this really from the moment of birth. As soon as the baby's mouth fits the mother's nipple, the baby has a conception of parental intercourse.
E o bebê tem, assim que ele nasce, ele tem essa concepção, ele entende isso.
Which is the beginning of all other concepts, all future concepts are built on this idea.
Que vai ser o começo de todos os outros conceitos construídos em cima dessa ideia.
And, well, the idea of the siblings is all the mother's internal babies and, envy and jealousy but they're all necessary. It's necessary to have the idea of the potentially infinite siblings. The baby needs to have that idea that is possible.
The baby has to have
the idea of there being potentially infinite siblings. Brothers, sisters, yeah. That inside the mother, there are many, it's full of babies. Full of potential babies.
Então, dentro da mãe, o bebê tem a ideia que está cheio de irmãos em potenciais.
The baby needs the feeling of jealousy and envy.
O bebê precisa do sentimento de inveja e ciúmes.
A minha pergunta e o meu interesse também é sobre o efeito estético, e eu queria saber um pouquinho mais sobre como o feio pode ser tão belo E é um elemento que os veristas entraram com mais força em todos os movimentos artísticos.
Como feio pode ser tão belo?
Que é algo que a gente vê nas gravuras dela e que os artistas do verismo trouxeram com mais força para a arte. Eu estou chamando de feio, por exemplo, esses poros contorcidos, o elemento do engano, talvez, que ela tenha falado.
E essa da parte de...
Não, esse é só um exemplo para a gente ficar o feio, né? Se ela pudesse falar um pouquinho mais, como o feio pode ter um impacto de belo.
I think part of the problem is what do we find ugly? What does it mean?
O que significa o feio? Essa é parte do problema.
Por exemplo, esses corpos contorcidos, expressões de horror.
Okay. I mean, I think probably ugliness is associated with the idea of death.
Eu acredito que a ideia de feiura está associada com a ideia de morte.
And that is also associated with things that are strange.
Que também é associada com coisas que são estranhas, que causam estranhamento.
So fear of the unknown and fear of death.
Medo do desconhecido e medo da morte.
I think create the feeling that something is ugly, and there it's an innate tendency. I think we are born with that fear of death.
É algo inato. Ela acredita que a gente nasce com esse medo da morte.
And therefore, in the aesthetic conflict,
em relação ao conflito estético,
the ugliness or the hate of the mother, for example,
a feiura ou o ódio da mãe, por exemplo,
is to do with the baby's fear that even if the mother appears beautiful on the outside, the mother is going to cause his death.
Tem a ver com o medo do bebê. Mesmo que a mãe esteja linda do lado de fora, tem a ver com o receio do bebê, da morte.
Which is why the baby needs faith.
É por isso que o bebê precisa de fé.
Because the baby cannot understand the inside of the mother.
O bebê não consegue entender o interior da mãe.
And therefore the baby has a choice of two kinds of investigation.
Ele pode escolher entre dois tipos de investigação.
Which Bjorn describes as kill it or find out about it.
Que o Bjorn diz, ou você mata ou você descobre sobre isso.
So like there's exploratory curiosity or there is intrusive curiosity.
Ou é uma curiosidade exploratória, ou é uma,
exploratory or intrusive.
Ou uma intrusiva, ou uma curiosidade intrusiva, exploratória ou intrusiva.
So if the baby cannot tolerate the fear of death, the baby may go for intrusive curiosity.
Se o bebê não pode tolerar o medo da morte, ele pode tomar o caminho da curiosidade intrusiva.
Whereas if the baby has more faith in the mother's goodness, the baby can go for exploratory curiosity.
Mas se ele tem fé se ele pode ter fé nessa mãe, ele vai tomar o caminho da curiosidade exploratória. Se ele pode ter essa fé.
Bom, se agradecer, né, a grande apresentação. Eu queria abrir um pouco minha pergunta para além do âmbito do consultório, né, do consultório. Eu queria perguntar, né, como Kierkegaard considera que a fé é significativamente somente a nível pessoal e não cultural ou social, e o dogma é grupal, né? Como podemos ter fé na humanidade? Na humanidade. Como podemos ter fé na humanidade? Né?
Desculpe. A primeira citação que você faz do Kierkegaard, você pode repetir?
Yeah. Eu posso falar em inglês também. Então, you've mentioned Kierkegaard saying that faith is only an individual, personal phenomenon, not cultural and social. So, how can we have faith in humanity? Como é que a humanidade pode alcançar a sua própria humanidade e beleza? How can humanity reach its own humanity and beauty? Should we be humorous and light about our own destructive nature? Né? Nós devemos então ser irônicos e leves sobre a nossa própria destrutividade. Yeah, so I would like to ask you about, this individual, personal versus cultural, social issue regarding our faith. Então, eu queria pegar essa questão da fé, né? Essa meditação em termos dessa oposição entre o individual e o social cultural. Thank you.
Yes, I think what Kierkegaard is saying is that I think Kierkegaard does not believe in faith as an institution, like, for example, as part of a church.
O Kierkegaard não acredita na fé como uma instituição, como a igreja.
Yeah. Because we are in an era where we're facing the finitude of the world, right? So we have global warming, we have wars. So our world aesthetics, for me, it's very, it's not beautiful. So you, as a scholar of aesthetics, of the human aesthetics, this is more a personal question in terms of what you think is the future of humanity in that sense. How can humanity reach its own humanity? Então, como é que a humanidade, diante do... Nós estamos numa era que a gente está aí, o aquecimento global, a finitude do mundo, está aí. Como é que a gente pode alcançar uma estética da nossa humanidade, né? Da nossa própria humanidade?
Did you understand?
I think so, yes. Well, I think, the last words of Bion's memoir of the future, he says, wisdom or oblivion, take your choice.
Wisdom?
Wisdom or oblivion. Oblivion, complete darkness, forgetfulness, oblivion.
Ela está falando das últimas palavras do Bion na Memória do Futuro. Can you repeat?
He says, question, wisdom or oblivion, take your choice. A question. He says, wisdom or oblivion? Wisdom or oblivion?
Sabedoria ou esquecimento? Faça a sua escolha.
Yeah. He says, take your choice.
Faça a sua escolha.
In other words, even though faith, well, to put Bion and Kierkegaard together.
Para colocar Bion e Kierkegaard juntos.
You don't need a collective faith.
Você não precisa de uma fé coletiva.
What you need is a collection of individuals with faith.
Você precisa de uma coleção de indivíduos com fé.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
A última questão.
Gratidão, Meg, pelas palavras, gratidão pelos pensamentos e pela alegria. E pela ternura em colocar os pensamentos para fora. Eu senti falta da palavra inspiração. A inspiração, sentida como patos, sentida como submissão, sentida como extravasamento, como construção de si.
Extravasamento.
Construção de si, submissão, enfim. E a produção artística, então?
Well, yes, I think inspiration is a very important word.
Inspiração é uma palavra muito importante.
My very first study when I was at university was about inspiration in two poets, Milton and Keats.
Meu primeiro trabalho na universidade foi sobre inspiração, em Milton e Keats.
But I think to translate that into psychoanalytic terms,
mas para traduzir isso em termos psicanalíticos,
I think inspiration describes the relationship between the infant self and the internal object.
Eu acredito que a inspiração significa a relação entre o self do infante e the self infant
and the internal
e
object.
os objetos internos.
Yes, because it is what happens when the infant self learns from the object.
É o que acontece quando o infante aprende dos objetos internos.
On the model of the baby feeding at the breast.
E o modelo do alimento com o bebê, ou com o seio bebê seio.
And it is the same as what Bion means by reverie. Reverie is results in inspiration. Reverie. Yeah.
É o mesmo que ele quer dizer quando ele fala da capacidade de reverie.
And it is the internal evolution happens through inspiration.
É a evolução interna acontecendo através da inspiração.
So I think that the word that the poets use is the same as what psychoanalysts describe as personality development.
As palavras que os poetas usam são o mesmo que são da mesma qualidade do que os analistas do trabalho dos analistas, das intervenções dos analistas.
I think it's a better word than reparation.
É uma palavra melhor que Sorry, I lost my
a better word than reparation.
É uma palavra melhor que reparação.
Yeah. And I think that's why Bion expands the Mrs. Klein's model.
E é por isso que ela acha que o Bion expande o modelo kleiniano.
When he says that we don't only need the restoration of the mother.
A gente não precisa só da restauração da mãe.
We also need the evolution of the ineffable.
A gente precisa da evolução do inefável.
Because that is inspiration.
Porque isso é inspiração.
Bom, vamos finalizar a primeira mesa de hoje. Agradeço muito a participação da Meg e dos nossos colegas participantes Eu gostaria de informar que nós vamos servir um almoço para aqueles que compraram o voucher e que quem ainda não comprou o voucher do almoço, ele se encontra à disposição na recepção, no andar de cima. Então, pode ser adquirido por R$60 no cheque ou em dinheiro. Nós não temos a possibilidade do cartão de crédito. E depois se dirigir aqui à sala em frente. Nós temos 2 horas de intervalo para o almoço e vamos voltar então às 14 horas. Tá bom? Muito obrigada.